This is the Phoenix Eye, the world's first hybrid wheelchair, a unique looking carbon fibre chair that has a little trick up its sleeve. While at first glance it looks like a fully manual chair, it actually houses two 150 watt motors in the front caster wheels, effectively giving you four-wheel drive in an impressively compact and lightweight package. If that's not tempting enough, they also function as electronic brakes for going downhill and can stop you at the touch of a button. I've been using the Phoenix Eye for the past few months, and I wanted to give you my honest thoughts on this chair, answer any questions you might have, and hopefully help you decide whether this might be the chair for you. Phoenix Instinct is a small company based out of Forres in North Scotland and is predominantly known for making wheelchair bags that clip onto your chair and allow you to travel independently. In late 2020, the Toyota Mobility Foundation awarded Phoenix Instinct $1 million in a challenge to produce a product that could improve the lives of people with paralysis. If you'd like to hear more on this, I have interviewed the CEO, Andrew Slorence, who is himself a wheelchair user and was previously behind the carbon black chairs with which you might be familiar. The Phoenix Eye took on a few different iterations, including a chair that self-adjusted its centre of gravity before settling on its current form, a rather slick-looking carbon fibre chair with e-assist. Firstly, let's talk about how this chair looks. Now, if you're someone who has to spend any amount of time in a wheelchair, you start to care about how it looks. I get the impression from speaking to Andrew that he became a little bit frustrated and fed up with not seeing any advancement in wheelchair technology over the past few decades. In particular, seeing chairs that all kind of look the same, overly clinical, without any style or personality. I'm not sure I entirely agree with all of the points, but you can't deny the Phoenix Eye looks rather special indeed. Personally, I think it looks fantastic, especially when paired with these four-spoke carbon fibre wheels from Karima and the wooden push rims from Lignerim, but this is obviously entirely subjective and you can mix and match to your heart's content. In any case, I think it's refreshing to see something that looks a bit different, turns heads and has some real personality to it. Full disclosure, I also just think carbon fibre looks awesome. But is carbon fibre really the best material for a chair that you're using and abusing day in, day out? Any wheelchair user knows that over time your chair gets naturally knocked, bumped and scratched during the abuse of everyday life. I've certainly heard a few people express doubt over whether carbon fibre is up to the job structurally, and moreover whether you'd want to subject such a fancy piece of carbon to that abuse in the first place. Well, let's examine this point in a bit more detail. The Phoenix Eye is by no means the first carbon fibre chair on the market. There are various other chairs such as the Panthera X that assume the somewhat more traditional frame appearance and are made out of carbon fibre entirely, and more recently the Bowhead Era, which might end up being a direct competitor to the Phoenix Eye. Carbon fibre is an incredibly strong and lightweight material that can be moulded into pretty much any shape, but it's not renowned for its malleability. You can stress it and stress it to a point until it fractures, and quite often catastrophically. That being said, the one-piece design of the frame on the Phoenix Eye is said to be more than just aesthetic. The engineers claim that by making it one piece and curved, there are no natural transition points that would act as a focus for stress. On balance, I would argue that during daily use, you're unlikely to generate enough force to do more than just scratch the frame. Now, should that happen, you can essentially buff out any imperfections with some very fine-grade sandpaper, although I can already hear the materially minded among you choking at the thought of using sandpaper anywhere near carbon fibre. My thoughts on this are that you should expect knocks and bumps in everyday life, and while it's a shame to mark your nice chair, it's relatively harmless and easy to buff these out, as I'm showing. The backrest, meanwhile, is made out of a combination of carbon fibre and Kevlar and folds flat in quite an intuitive and easy way. There's a good amount of adjustment forwards and backwards to find a comfortable position. On the back side, there's also a fairly simple and elegant set of prongs for carrying a backpack, which works really naturally. Certainly much better than slinging the straps over my old backrest and waiting for them to inevitably get caught in the wheels. Below this is a bar that serves as an attachment point for the Phoenix Eye bags, which is a nice touch. Another feature you should be aware of is that the Phoenix Eye uses a flat piece of carbon fibre for the seat, and while there is a small angle creating a drop of around 2 centimetres from front to back end, there's no real dump or bucket with which you might be familiar with from other chairs from like RGK. If this is something that's important to you, it's definitely worth trying before you buy. Phoenix Instinct encourages you to do exactly that. They welcome visitors at their HQ in Forres, or they can also meet you at Inverness Airport to help you try out the chair, which I think is hugely valuable when considering such a significant purchase. Once the chair is switched on, the motors on the Phoenix Eye are controlled from a dial which can be mounted on either side of the chair to suit your preference. Here I've chosen the right hand side because I'm right-handed. While there's definitely a learning curve to using the right level of assist, it becomes very natural and intuitive after a short time. It's quite difficult to actually describe the feeling without experiencing it yourself, but it's analogous to an e-bike. You push off, the chair detects your movement, and the casters engage. In most situations, this allows you to do as much or as little work as you want, and is by far the main selling point of the Phoenix Eye as far as I can see. To achieve the same effect on a regular manual chair, you'd need to pair it with something like a tri-ride or a smart drive, both of which are an extra expense, think around £5,000, and create a much bigger footprint than the chair alone. It's also one more piece of equipment that you have to carry around with you, load into your car, and consider when travelling abroad. The innovation in the Phoenix Eye means that you have the e-assist of the front casters to take the sting out, all while retaining the agility of a compact manual chair. The first time I used it, it genuinely did bring a smile to my face, which I never thought I'd say about using a wheelchair. I think it was more a sense of relief, surprise, and even joy that someone had taken the time to sit down, no pun intended, and think about developing a smart piece of mobility kit that could actually improve wheelchair users' lives. Now, that might seem a rather grand claim, but I don't think it's overblown, and here's why. Pushing a wheelchair is hard work. Navigating an inaccessible world with uneven pavements, potholes, steep streets, and a surprising lack of drop curbs can be physically and mentally draining. On top of this, going off-road onto grass or gravel is really hard going in a manual wheelchair, and I could only really achieve it by either putting a front wheel attachment on, which again is an extra piece of kit to carry around, or doing a wheelie around everywhere, which isn't particularly practical. The pull on the casters of the Phoenix Eye lets you navigate uneven terrain with relative ease, and it's not an exaggeration to say you sometimes don't need to push it all on grass with the right level of assist, though obviously you do need to steer. Now, we haven't even mentioned the utility of having a hand or two free whilst moving, which makes a huge difference. Carrying a drink from one room to another is just one example of many tasks that become a lot easier with the e-assist. There are 9 levels of assist with increasing torque, as well as 5 levels of turbo on top of this. To be honest, the vast majority of the time I'm using between levels 1 and 3 when inside, occasionally 4 to 5 if outside. I'll crank it up a little bit more if I have to go uphill. I work in a hospital, which allows me to move from ward to ward over a 12-hour shift with relative ease and reduce the strain and fatigue in my shoulders. I've tried to quantify this energy conservation with a real-world test that I'll move on to shortly. Going downhill, wheelchair users will be familiar with the burning sensation of gripping the pushrooms to slow you down. This can be really uncomfortable and also make your hands dirty if the road surface is mucky. The integrated electronic braking works by simply rolling back the dial into braking mode to achieve your desired speed. This can be difficult to get at just the right level, especially if you're with someone else, but it's generally pretty effective. You can also activate the brakes for a more sudden stop by pressing the dial in. I don't think the braking is regenerative on the Phoenix Eye, but it's a feature I'd really like to see in future iterations. To compare the real-world performance of the Phoenix Eye with a regular day chair, I pushed a 2-kilometre route not far from where I live with both chairs and looked at several different parameters, including perceived effort, time taken, and heart rate. This is not a perfect test, and maybe no such thing exists, but I think it's a close approximation of what you can expect in the real world. Where possible, I controlled for variables that I could. For example, both of the chairs had Schwalbe Pro 1 tyres pumped up to 90 psi, but equally there were some differences such as the push rims, geckos on the Phoenix Eye and ellipse R's on the RGK. However, both did have a rubber grip strip. Here you can see the Strava files for both outings. Broadly speaking, the route is fairly representative of pushing your average street in the UK, by which I mean there's plenty of cambered pavements, potholes, gravel with some steeper sections and a few crossings thrown in for good measure. Firstly, I'll discuss the perceived effort using the rate of perceived exertion, or RPE, a scale from 1 to 10, where 1 is very easy and 10 is all-out effort. With the Phoenix Eye, the RPE was between 1 and 4, depending on whether I was simply coasting or whether I was pushing uphill. In contrast, when using the RGK, the RPE was between 3 and 6, if not 7 at times, which I think maps well to the heart rate data I'll show you in a minute. I'll also add here that the ride feel was much more comfortable in the Phoenix Eye, which I think in part is due to the larger casters and the caster fork design, which, as you see here, integrates a little bit of suspension. I also found myself pausing and looking down a lot less when using the Phoenix Eye, as I wasn't constantly concerned that my casters might get caught in one of the various imperfections in the pavement. If you've used a wheelchair for any length of time, you'll know what I mean here. Moving on to heart rate, this is maybe the most interesting and revealing part. For context, both runs were made in mid-February when the temperature was around 4 degrees. I was pushing at a faster pace than I would if accompanied by an able-bodied person, and that's just my personal preference. Allowing for this, you can see that my average heart rate was around 25% higher using the manual chair compared to the Phoenix Eye, and due to some technical difficulties with my monitor dropping out, it was likely even higher than this. Importantly, my maximum heart rate was also significantly higher using the manual chair due to the surges followed by sustained efforts to get up the hills. This naturally led to a much higher perceived exertion and fatigue with the manual chair. If you consider this from an energy conservation point of view and extrapolate it to various tasks across a 24-hour or 7-day period, I think the advantages are plain to see. Finally, let's look at the time difference. Perhaps unsurprisingly, I was around 14% slower in the manual chair compared to the Phoenix Eye on the 2-kilometer loop, and that equated to just shy of 3 minutes of extra pushing, all with a higher heart rate. So in summary, these results are not particularly groundbreaking or unexpected, but I do think it's interesting to look at just how much higher your exertion is when using a manual chair, as well as the extra time that you take. Again, if you extrapolate that over a day, a week, a month, the advantages start to become clear. Still, hidden within this is a potential criticism of the chair. Many would say that shoulder strength and fitness is an integral part of maintaining your independence as a wheelchair user, and if you let the chair do all the work, you relinquish that independence and lose your strength. I actually agree with this, but the way I see the Phoenix Eye is that it helps take the sting out of the everyday effort rather than taking over entirely. So I use the e-assist sparingly, but it does help me accomplish those more difficult tasks and also just get through the day without completely ruining myself. I've also been pleasantly surprised by the battery life. I have both the larger and the smaller versions of the battery, and the larger one easily lasts 3 days, if not 4. The smaller one around 2 days. I do turn off the chair when it's not in use and use the assist sparingly when I am moving, so that probably factors into that. Obviously this will be shorter if you make use of the internal lights, which are an optional extra. These are actually angled downwards towards the pavement to light up a potentially uneven path as you move forwards, which again is another really thoughtful feature that only a wheelchair user would think of. You might be wondering what this chair weighs. Electric chairs are typically beasts and can weigh 20 to 100 kilograms, if not more, whereas manual chairs can be as light as a few kilograms. Phoenix Instinct quotes the transfer weight, i.e. without wheels, cushion or battery, at 6.5 kilograms, which is not the lightest by any stretch, but is pretty competitive considering the fact that it's got e-assist in the front wheels and integrated electronics. While it is noticeably heavier than the RGK during car transfers, it's still manageable for me, although I would still like it to be a little bit lighter. With how I do car transfers, I also find there's not a natural place to reach for and grab, and I would have appreciated an extra piece of cylindrical carbon beneath the seat, though I appreciate this would have added more weight. You do also have to allow a little bit more time to transfer for the extra step of removing the battery. I prefer as few steps as possible and so often just leave the cushion and battery in, although this does make for a heavier transfer. Now, I couldn't make this video without commenting on price, which is often the first question many people have about any new chair. I have to preface this by saying that the price of disability equipment is shockingly high, and many people simply won't believe it when you tell them the figures. My first custom chair from RGK, for example, was around £5,400, all for the privilege of having a chair that fit me well and didn't give me back pain or pressure sores. We also have to put price into context here. You can get a very decent wheelchair for around $1,000 or pounds. Not a Wheelchair, for example, is a site that sells a wheelchair that's perfectly good and meets many people's needs. However, an equivalent custom fit carbon fibre or titanium chair can easily set you back at least £7,000. And if you were to add an e-assist into that, realistically, your options are e-motion wheels, a tri-ride or Baytech, or smooth or smart drive, all of which retail at around about the £5,000 mark. So pretty soon you're looking at a total of £12,000 plus. which is obviously a very significant sum of money. Incidentally, this is roughly the price the Phoenix Eye retails at. At first, this might seem obscenely high, and don't get me wrong, it's a hell of a lot of money. However, when you consider that it incorporates a custom carbon fiber chair with integrated e-assist at a very respectable weight, with the compactness of a manual chair, I think they've got it about right. It's also worth noting that this is a small team of fewer than 10 people based in a small rural town in Scotland, and the CEO is himself a wheelchair user. These guys are not out to financially exploit disabled people. The harsh reality of making a bespoke piece of mobility equipment on a relatively small scale without big name sponsors means that it will be expensive. If demand existed to produce these on an industrial scale, then this would likely change. Until then, many disabled people who could genuinely benefit from this will likely be priced out by this kit, but that's by no means unique to the Phoenix Eye. As a final note, it's worth having a look to see whether any schemes in your area would support the purchase of such a chair. In the UK, for example, if you're employed, either by an organisation or self-employed, you can make use of access to work to help fund mobility equipment that you need in the workplace, and that's how this chair was funded. In summary, would I recommend the Phoenix Eye? It's certainly a big investment to make, and I think you should definitely try before you buy if you can. But I've really enjoyed using it these past few months. It looks fantastic, turns heads, and manages to pack a powerful e-assist into a compact chair that's relatively lightweight, and above all, it makes my life easier. Thank you for watching, and if you have any questions or comments, please put them down below in the comments section. Subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one.